On a Sunday morning in April of 2024, a pastor named John Paul Miller finished his sermon at Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And then, before anybody could stand up and grab their keys, he told the room his wife was dead. He said it was self-inflicted. He told them to leave quietly. He told them not to talk about it. Mica Miller was 30 years old. She had filed for divorce days earlier, and in the 6 weeks before that Sunday, she had called the police over and over and over again. And she had told one officer, in her own words, that she was afraid for her life. This was the first version of the story, and it did not hold up for very long. And we are going to unpack all of it. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post a video or two on one of these topics every week, so if you like this sort of thing, please subscribe, hype, share, do all the things. I would love to have you here. So this one has been on my mind for a really long time. I've been wanting to do an update video for, like 6 to 8 months. I did a deep dive. I will leave it here back when this story first broke. And with the new documentary coming out this week, I thought this would be a great opportunity for not just a refresher, but for all of the updates because there are a lot. And honestly, it's great. This timing is really great because honestly, this case has just been surrounded by speculation. There are just theories stacked on theories out there, and a lot of them are being stated as fact by people who have literally never even opened a court document. And, I didn't want to just add to that pile. So, this is how we're going to do this today. We're literally going to follow the paper trail. I've been looking at police reports, court filings, sworn affidavits, the federal indictment, and reporting from the Post and Courier, WPDE, WBTW, and Fitz News, all of whom have been on this case since day one. So where something is contested, I'm going to tell you who is contesting it. Where something is unproven, I'm going to say that out loud. And I want to say this at the top because it really matters. Mica Miller's death was ruled an unaliving. Her husband has never been charged in connection with her death. What he has been charged with is something else entirely, and we're going to get there, but in the order that it happened. Now, to understand Solid Rock Church, you have to start one generation back because this is actually a family business. John Paul Miller's father was a preacher named Reginald Wayne Miller, who goes by Wayne. And at one point, Wayne Miller was a genuinely big deal in South Carolina. According to the Post and Courier, he ran what was described as the largest charismatic church in the eastern part of the state. Charismatic being the operative word, which also presents, in my opinion, as a red flag. He founded a Bible college, and he had a morning television show called Good Morning Jesus, which is quite a title. And then that empire came apart. Wayne Miller himself was actually accused of misconduct, and in 2014, he pleaded guilty in federal court in Florence to fraud in foreign labor contracting, plus visa fraud and wage and hour violations. All this from a holy man with a Jesus morning show. Now, I want to be precise about this because precision actually really matters. The underlying allegation, according to prosecutors and according to the students themselves, was that international students at his Bible college were made to work long hours for very little pay, and that they were told they would lose their visas if they complained. But what he actually pleaded guilty to were fraud and wage charges, even though what he did was a bit more egregious, in my opinion. So that's what is happening on the outside, so I can only imagine what's going on the inside. And what we know about inside that household comes largely from a divorce filing, because Wayne Miller's ex-wife, Susan Miller, put it all under oath. In her filing, she described waking up in the middle of the night unable to find her husband, and then learning the next morning that he was in a bedroom with somebody who attended the Bible school. Yeah, she discovered this on her own. I mean, can you imagine? Not only do you think you're in a healthy marriage, you also believe that your husband is straight, and you also believe that he is a godly man, but you wake up one morning and find out that your entire worldview of that person has completely shattered. She also described him as a man with a volatile temper, and she described watching him beat their son John Paul, who was just 5 or 6 years old at the time, with a leather belt at Disney World. And this was hard enough to leave bloody stripes down the child's legs. At Disney World! This is supposed to be the happiest place on earth. But she also said that he would justify all this behavior with scripture. Spare the rod, spoil the child. And I do want to be a little more careful here because this is the part of these stories where people obviously get really uncomfortable, and it's totally understandable why. Because although it's really difficult, you can hold two things at the same time. A child who is hurt is a child who is hurt. It's real and it's awful. But also, being hurt as a child is not a defense for anything that you as adult do later in life. Both of those things are true. And I just want to bring this up now as we move forward into this case. Now, John Paul, the man at the center of all of this, used to joke about his upbringing from the pulpit. He liked to say that his family put the funk in dysfunctional, which is a really slick way to gesture at something enormous and then just move along quickly before anybody asks a follow-up question. Now, before he was a pastor, he had a criminal record of his own. In the late 90s, John Paul Miller was convicted after hitting a woman with his truck in a subdivision outside Myrtle Beach, and then he just continued to drive roughly 100 yards with her on the hood of his car before he stopped. Now, in court records, he said that she had been harassing him and she jumped onto the hood herself and then refused to get off. He ended up receiving a pardon for that charge in 2022. Yeah. And then his wife would go on to unalive herself just 2 years later. And the man at the center of this controversy has not just a criminal record, but a violent one. So in 2006, this is the man who decides to start a church. He preached his first sermon at the Sakosti Library, according to his own biography on the church website, and the church would grow. It moved into a former Air Force chapel that he acquired from his father's religious organization in the Market Common neighborhood of Myrtle Beach, which is, the nice part. Hundreds of homes, dozens of businesses, and a lot of money. By the early 2020s, Solid Rock had around 700 members, and according to property and tax records reviewed by the Post and Courier, the church held millions of dollars in assets, 11 vehicles, a plane, and plans for $1 million expansion. A plane for a church in Myrtle Beach. Now, one of his own elders, a man named Bernard Kennerson, told the Post and Courier that he had no idea the church owned a plane, and that the plane was so John Paul could fly to other churches around the country to preach. Kennerson also said the elders were never shown the church's financial statements. One elder left specifically because of the secrecy around money. And I guess this would be considered the first red flag, even though we've seen some waving before this church was created, but it is still a big glaring red flag. Financial opacity. When the people who are nominally in charge of oversight cannot see the books, there is no oversight. There is just a guy. Now, John Paul Miller's first wife was a woman named Allison Williams. Their marriage ended in 2015, according to the Post and Courier. They had 4 children together. Williams later filed a sworn affidavit in a contested custody case. It is a public court filing, and I want to tell you exactly what kind of document it is before I read from it because it really matters. It is her sworn account of the things that he says he told her. It is one side of a custody fight, and no court has ever made a finding that any of it is true. John Paul Miller has denied wrongdoing throughout all of this. But with all of that on the table, here is what she put in it. She stated under oath that John Paul told her that he had been intimate and inappropriate with underage girls in the church. She stated that he told her that he'd hired prostitutes during their marriage, and she stated that he blamed his behavior on years of SA he said he suffered at the hands of his father. So again, these are sworn statements about what she says he told her in a custody case, and obviously the claims were denied. And for his part, Wayne Miller said publicly that he's not perfect, but that not every accusation about him is true. Great way to sidestep around this particular accusation, though. Williams also stated in that affidavit that she tried to take the SA accusations to the police, but that the girls involved were too afraid to come forward. And without their statements, she said police told her nobody would believe her because he was a respected pastor and she was a woman in the middle of a divorce. I mean, okay, obviously that specific dynamic shows up in almost every episode I make, and the institution's credibility becomes the armor. He's a pastor, she's the bitter ex-wife, and that framing does the work before anybody even has to look at the evidence. Williams also said that church leadership tried to make him step down and get counseling, and that he told them that he had 100% decision-making authority at Solid Rock, so they couldn't. So here's why that marriage ended. According to divorce records reviewed by the Post and Courier, Williams discovered that John Paul was having an affair. The woman was a church member who babysat for their family, and her name was Mica. She was married to John Paul's best friend at the time. John Paul had officiated their wedding. So let's talk about who Mica actually was, because she has spent 2 years being a headline, and honestly, she deserves better than that. Mica Francis grew up in a big family. Her father is Michael Francis. Her siblings include Sierra, Nathaniel, Abigail, and Anna, several of whom you're about to hear from in this episode because they've been fighting for her without stopping since the day she died. According to court records, Mica had been attending the church since she was 15 years old. She was a singer, and a really good one. She led the worship team and the women's ministry at Solid Rock. She was also, by every account, the creative engine of that church. Even John Paul said this in an interview after her death. He said that she created just about everything they had. The logos, the designs, everything on the screen. He said the smallest thing would get her going. Her friend Sam Rickman, who played bass in the church band, described her like this. He said her superpower was just being a freaking good person. He said she really loved God and really took what it meant to be a believer to heart. And he said the thing that has been taken away from her loved ones on top of everything else is the ability to just grieve her, because this case never stops moving. Now, here is where the timeline gets contested, and I want to lay out both sides. On February 21st, 2024, Mica told a Myrtle Beach police officer that she had known John Paul Miller since she was 10 years old, and that he had, in her words, groomed her while she worked for him at Solid Rock Church, all the way up until they were married. These are statements that are in the police report. Her sister Sierra told the Post and Courier that when she was a teenager attending that church, John Paul was not allowed to close the door to his office during meetings with girls or women. Sierra said the place always felt more like a cult than a church to her, and that everybody else just pretended nothing bad was happening. Now, John Paul Miller has denied all allegations of abuse. So eventually, these two get married. And the way they got married is one of the strangest details in this entire case. According to Mica's divorce attorney, Regina Ward, they married secretly first and then staged a public ceremony at the church afterward. And the reason he gave Mica for the secret first marriage was that he needed to be legally able to act as her caretaker after she had breast augmentation surgery, which Ward says he had encouraged her to get. Yeah. So I'm going to say this again. Her husband encouraged her to get breast augmentation and then said, "Well, I need to take care of you in your recovery, so we have to get married right now. And it has to be in secret because I need to control all your medical care after the surgery that I told you to get." Yeah, sounds more than a little controlling. And her family didn't find out about the marriage at all until after the effects of anesthesia caused Mica to behave really strangely, and she would end up in a mental hospital. That's how they learned it happened. And when they showed up at that hospital, Ward says John Paul refused to let them see her. Sierra called that the first step in a pattern of isolating Mica from her family. And records on the wedding date are inconsistent, by the way. A police report lists the marriage as 2018. Regina Ward has described the public ceremony as taking place in 2017. And I'm not going to pretend I can reconcile any of this, so I'm just telling you that it just gets messier as we move on. So here's where the playbook really starts showing up. And if you've watched a few of these with me, you are going to recognize every single move. We have isolation, financial control, information control, medical control, and a community that has been trained to treat the leader's version of reality as the only reality. In 2022, Mica fled to her family's home in the upstate for a few days. According to Sierra, a church elder helped Mica get out of the house after John Paul pounded on the door and yelled at her while she was locked in a bedroom. And in text messages that Sierra provided, John Paul threatened to show up at her house. He wrote, "I'm armed, I'm ready. I'm armed, I'm ready." From a pastor to his wife's sister. In January of 2023, according to a police report, the couple separated. In October of 2023, Mica officially filed for divorce. But then she said she withdrew it. Regina Ward says John Paul convinced her to dismiss that case. Now, this is the part where people in the comments tend to get frustrated and say, well, why didn't she just leave? And I want to answer that directly because Regina Ward answered it better than I can. Ward said, quote, "People have a hard time wrapping their mind around the idea that somebody can't just walk out the door." And she said it's especially hard if you feel like as a biblical woman, you're supposed to obey your husband. I mean, when your abuser is also your pastor, leaving him kind of means leaving God. And that's the trap. And he built that trap around her on purpose. Now, Mica would give her attorney 11 of her journals. 11. And Ward has said those journals describe the alleged abuse and also Mica trying to square her own religious beliefs about divorce and forgiveness with what was actually happening to her. And Mica would say the quiet part out loud in a video that she posted herself in March of 2024. She said, "God hates divorce, but why? It's because it hurts people. But does it hurt people? How do you think God feels about that?" That is a woman doing theology in real time in order to give herself permission to survive. Now, in February of 2024, things would escalate. On February 8th, Mica was involuntarily hospitalized for 48 hours. Regina Ward has stated that John Paul had convinced Mica to give him power of attorney over her healthcare decisions, and that he used that power of attorney to have her committed. On February 10th, she was discharged. Hospital staff told her that John Paul had picked up her purse and her car keys while she was inside. She went back to the Walmart Neighborhood Market parking lot where she had left her car, but the car was gone, and she reported it. And because the car was marital property and they were still legally married, no charges were filed. When the officer contacted John Paul about it, he said Mica suffered from episodes every year around Christmas, and that she spent large amounts of money when she stopped taking her prescriptions. So here's the contested center of this entire case, and I want to kind of give it to you from both sides. John Paul Miller's position, which he has stated publicly and repeatedly, is that Mica had serious mental illness, that she was on lithium, that she had struggled with unaliving ideation before, and that he was the only person trying to get her help. In a television interview after her death, he said when she stayed on her medication, things were amazing, and that when she came off it, things got unusual. He said that he went to 48 people in 3 months, and nobody believed him when he said she needed help. Micah's family's position is that she had no mental health problems before she married him, and Sierra Francis has said that directly. Reporting has also indicated Mica had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had spoken publicly about her own mental health struggles. So the honest answer is that both a mental health history and an alleged pattern of abuse can exist in this story at the same time, and one does not cancel the other one out. In fact, I really want to be clear about this because one of the most well documented tactics in coercive control is weaponizing a real diagnosis. You really don't need to invent an illness to use one. And here's a specific thing that a church elder told the Post and Courier. Bernard Kennerson said John Paul convinced the elders that Mica had been having a psychotic episode for months and that anything she said could not be trusted. Kennerson said John Paul would sometimes show the elders a 3-inch thick notebook that he claimed documented her mental health problems. I mean, how dare anybody share somebody else's mental health issues? How dare they? This was a 3-inch binder that he would carry around to show people, all about his wife. This is a man who is already building a case file on a person that he has to discredit because, I wonder what would happen to him if her truth came out. In March of 2024, Mica Miller started documenting everything with law enforcement, and it's the reason we know as much as we know. On March 11th of that year, she called Horry County Police because she found her tire slashed with a piece of metal. Investigators later identified that piece of metal as a tire deflation device. It's the kind you can buy online. She named a potential suspect. An investigator said there was not enough evidence to prove that man was involved. That same day, she reported that the same man approached her at a gas station. She told him she didn't want to talk to him, and she pulled out her phone to record him, but he drove away. That same man then showed up at the East Coast Honda dealership where she was getting her car fixed. And it was at that dealership that mechanics found a tracking device on her car. So Mica went to the magistrate's office and tried to get a restraining order. And in that specific report, is the line that has followed this case ever since. She told police that she was afraid for her life. And while she was standing outside the magistrate's office with a police officer, a white Honda Accord drove slowly past. And Mica identified the driver. The car sped up and drove off. This is all in the officer's own report. 2 days later, on March 13th, somebody at Solid Rock Church filed a police report accusing Mica of transferring church donation funds into her personal account. $1,199 from the church's mission fund for a project in Kenya. Police later said there was insufficient evidence to pursue charges, and according to the Post and Courier, Mica proved the allegation was false. But look at the sequence. She goes to the magistrate to ask for a restraining order, but 2 days later, someone at the church accuses her of stealing from it. The report doesn't tell us who walked in and filed it, and I'm not going to try to guess here because I think guessing is how this case kind of just got polluted in the first place. But what I will say is that, in my opinion, any organization where a theft accusation surfaces within 48 hours of somebody seeking a protective order against its leader has a serious accountability problem, no matter who picked up the phone. Meanwhile, this is what John Paul was preaching. In March, from the pulpit, he told his congregation that he had read through his wife's text messages and counted 18 people who had offered to keep her secrets if she ever needed to talk about him. And then he told them that when Christian women want to talk about people who have hurt them, they should talk to Jesus. And he said, quote, "If somebody wants to call you and say bad things about somebody else, that's a demon talking to you." Is it, John? Is it a demon talking to you? Or is it your wife just telling people the monster that you are? Sir, 18 people tried to help your wife because they were all suspicious of you. because they were all concerned for her. So, of course, you're going to carry around a binder to try to show people just how unhinged your wife is and then say, "Oh my gosh, women shouldn't congregate together and talk about the men in their life because heaven forbid everybody finds out the truth about all the insidious things that I'm doing." Give me a break. This is a classic playbook in any patriarchal structure to try to silence women from telling the truth. This is information control stated out loud on a stage in front of 700 people that's all dressed up as Christianity. So if you take one thing from this episode, please take that. When a leader tells you that hearing a criticism of him is itself a spiritual attack on you, the group has stopped being a church and has started becoming a containment system, a cult. Now, on March 26th, there was a bench trial in the civil case Mica Miller versus John Paul Miller, in which Mica was receiving a restraining order. In April, Mica filed legal separation paperwork and started dividing assets. And she made her attorney an extensive list documenting John Paul's alleged behavior. Days before her death, she filed for divorce again, and he was served. And here's something I just keep coming back to because I think it kind of says everything about how the system kind of failed Mica. In the months before her death, Mica Miller contacted law enforcement more than 24 times, 24 times plus contacts with police. And none of it led to any meaningful intervention or protection. And now we're going to talk about April 27th of that year. And this is the section where we will describe Mica's death. And I'm going to keep it factual and not graphic, but if you do need to skip ahead, you can jump to the next chapter. The Robeson County Sheriff's Department released a detailed timeline of April 27, 2024, along with surveillance footage. So this is not speculation at all. This is the official record. At 10:13 that morning, Mica is seen on her own Ring camera leaving her home on Margarita Drive in Myrtle Beach. She comes back around 11 and leaves again at 11:38. At 12:12, she walks into a pawn shop on Mr. Joe White Avenue. She purchases a firearm and ammunition and leaves at 12:34. At 1:06 p.m., her black Honda Accord is on Highway 501 near Conway. At 1:27, she stops at a store on Highway 41 in Mullins and buys a drink and gas. At 2:54 in the afternoon, a 911 call is made. On that call, Mica asks whether her phone can be located and then indicates that she intends to take her own life. She then hangs up. The dispatcher tries to call her back several times and cannot reach her. At 3:03 p.m., Robeson County deputies are dispatched to Lumber River State Park for a welfare check. At 3:33, they arrive and begin searching with park rangers. At 3:33, they launch a drone. During that aerial search, a man fishing in the park approached detectives and told them that he had found a bag with Mica's ID inside. He told investigators that he had heard crying and then a gunshot. At 4:23 p.m., a man kayaking called 911 to report that he had found a body in the water. Investigators found a gun case in the passenger seat of her car and ammunition in the center console, along with the pawn shop receipt and the convenience store receipt, both dated that same day. The serial number on the firearm recovered from the water matched the box in her car. On May 6th, the Robeson County Medical Examiner released the cause of death: self-inflicted gunshot wound. Dr. Richard Johnson, the county medical examiner, also directly addressed one of the rumors that was already circulating, stating that the wound was not in the back of the head as had been speculated. Investigators also confirmed that John Paul Miller was not in North Carolina. He had gone to Charleston for a sporting event the day before, stayed the night, and drove back to Myrtle Beach, and he was with other people traveling in both directions. So that's the record. I know that a lot of people do not accept this finding, and I'm not going to sit here and mock anyone for grief or for suspicion because the behavior around this death has been so strange that suspicion is really a rational response. But I'm not going to invent a homicide for you. That's not really what I do here, because two things can be true at once. A woman can die by unaliving, and the conditions that led her there can be somebody else's responsibility. Those aren't competing theories, in my opinion. They're actually the same story. And as it turns out, the federal government eventually agreed that the second half of that sentence was actually worth investigating. The day after Micah died, John Paul Miller stood up in front of his congregation and made that announcement that we opened this episode with. Fitz News was the first outlet to publish the video of that announcement, and what shocked people about it was three things. One, the total flatness of it. Two, the timing. And three, the fact that it was tacked on to the very end of a normal sermon, but also the fact that he described her death as self-inflicted before the medical examiner had released a manner of death at all. He would then tell his congregation once again to not talk about it. He asked them to keep attending and to keep giving while he took leave. And then he wrote an obituary that described a happy and loving marriage. And the thing is, everyone in that building had watched that marriage fall apart in real time. He'd confessed marital infidelity to the congregation from the stage. One member wrote to Fitz News describing seeing Micah after a long absence and being so shocked by her appearance that they just had to hug her. That member described her as visibly diminished, worn down, and having lost her singing voice. Her singing voice. She was losing her voice. I mean, that's not a metaphor. The day after she died, according to text messages her family has shared publicly, John Paul texted the Francis family, and the message read, "This is what happens when you try to encourage someone to divorce the person they love and tell them they don't need medicine and that they're not ill when they are. Good job, Francis family." Really? Good job? To a family who had just lost their daughter and sister less than 24 hours ago? I mean, who the hell do you think you are? I mean, that is one of the most insensitive things I can think about doing. And it is obviously another tactic to switch the blame. Now, Micah's family filed sworn affidavits in probate court. Sarah Francis stated, "Micah stated to me on many occasions, if I end up with the bullet in my head, it was not me, it was JP. Her brother Nathaniel stated, "Micah told me on numerous occasions that she feared John Paul and just wanted to escape him." These are sworn statements about what Micah told them. They're not findings of fact about how she died, and the investigation reached a different conclusion. But they are on the record under oath, and they are the reason this case did not go quietly. On May 5th, two memorials happened at the same time. John Paul held one at Solid Rock, and Micah's family held a separate celebration of life on the beach in North Myrtle Beach. More than 100 people marched in her memory. Protesters would start showing up outside Solid Rock every Sunday, and they did not stop. By May 13th, the Robeson County Sheriff's Office announced that it had requested assistance from the FBI and the United States Attorney's Office in South Carolina, and said it had been in contact with them since the early stages of the investigation. And then elders started resigning from the church. Bernard Kennerson and his wife Susan both quit the week after Micah died. Susan Kennerson told the Post and Courier, quote, "We resigned because it was obvious that there are things going on there that aren't right, and it's more than just JP." Bernard Kennerson described the elders meeting that week as damage control. He said the main focus of the meeting was to protect John Paul and to protect the church. He said one elder finally said out loud what the rest were thinking, which was that he didn't care if the police came in and hauled John Paul off in handcuffs, because he came to church to serve the Lord, not the pastor. And that elder gets it. That is exactly the line. And the tragedy of high control groups is that by the time somebody says it out loud, the damage is already done. The 2 years since have been relentless, so let's just go in order. In July of 2024, John Paul Miller and Micah's family reached a global settlement ending all pending litigation between them, including control of Micah's estate. The terms are confidential, and both sides asked protesters to stand down and said they wanted to redirect their energy toward passing a coercive control law in her memory. On November 1st, 2024, FBI agents searched John Paul Miller's home in Horry County. They were there more than half a day and were seen making multiple trips with evidence bags. 6 days later, he was arrested and charged with third-degree assault and battery over an incident with a group of female protesters near the church. According to the arrest warrant, he tapped the brim of a woman's baseball cap and walked away. A witness said that she saw him hit the hat twice. His attorney said the protesters were antagonizing him. Doesn't matter, you still don't hit somebody. Then came the lawsuits, not against him, but from him. In January of 2025, John Paul Miller filed roughly 20 civil actions, many of them targeting the protesters demonstrating outside his church. Fitz News has reported that the total number of civil suits he filed against protesters and former church members has reached nearly 3 dozen. The people he sued say those suits were retaliatory and designed to intimidate them into silence. Court records show that many of them were dismissed. And guess whose money he's probably using to file all these lawsuits? The congregations, I would allege. One of those suits went to a jury in August of 2025. He sued Sam Rickman, his former bass player, for $7,500. The jury awarded John Paul $100 and awarded Rickman $3,400 on his counterclaim. Miller later dropped his appeal and then paid it, $100. Once again, I am asking every leader who reaches for a defamation suit to just check the math first. In February of 2025, the Solid Rock Church building had sold for $2.15 million. Signage came off the building that spring, and then 2 civil lawsuits landed that changed the shape of this story entirely. On February 25th, 2025, a woman identified as Jane Doe number 1 filed a 43-page complaint in Horry County Circuit Court against John Paul Miller, his father Wayne, and their affiliated religious organizations. She alleges that she was essayed by John Paul in 1998 when she was 15 and he was 19, and again in 2023 as an adult, and that the second assault triggered memories of the first. On March 25th, Jane Doe number 2 filed a similar suit, adding the family's school as a defendant and alleging abuse that began in 1999 when John Paul was a 19-year-old teacher there. Both complaints allege that the Millers built and concealed a system of sexual misconduct that harmed minors. Both allege the ministries were run for personal financial gain. The complaints state that the churches operated without adequate protection for minors. Now, these are civil allegations, and they have not been proven. Solid Rock Ministries has moved to strike allegations and to dismiss, and John Paul Miller's side has filed an answer expressly denying every allegation in Jane Doe number 1's suit. Nobody's been criminally charged as a result of these lawsuits, and none of it has been tested at a trial. Now, 13 months after Mica died, John Paul Miller would get married again. He married Susie Skinner, a woman from his congregation, in, once again, a private beach ceremony in Myrtle Beach with armed guards present. His father attended, and according to the freelance reporter who covered it, the couple's 7 combined children did not attend the wedding. Now, Susie Skinner's late husband was Chris Skinner, a quadriplegic Army veteran who drowned in 2021 after his wheelchair went into a swimming pool. And I'm raising this tragic event for one reason, which is that there is a mountain of speculation about that death too, and I want to hand you the actual files so you can just stop wondering. Now, Chris Skinner's death was ruled accidental. Myrtle Beach police reopened it briefly in early 2025 to look at some new interviews and then closed it again, stating there was no evidence that a crime had been committed. Nobody has been charged with anything in connection with it. So these are just 2 separate looks, the same answer. Nobody has been charged with anything in connection with it. Now, in Allison Williams' affidavit, she stated that Chris Skinner had asked John Paul to leave his wife and children alone about 2 weeks before he died. Miller has denied having an affair with Susie Skinner during either marriage and has said that they did not start dating until January of 2025. So that is really all there is to that piece of the story. An accidental death ruling that police have now reviewed twice, and a sworn statement from an ex-wife in an unrelated proceeding. And I'm giving you both because you would find them anyway, and because I'd rather you hear it from somebody who's going to tell you plainly that there's just no case here. Chris Skinner was a veteran and a motivational speaker and a person, and he deserves better than being a plot point in someone else's theory. And then on December 17th, 2025, after 19 months of federal investigation, a federal grand jury in Columbia returned a 2-count indictment against John Paul Miller. Here's exactly what he is charged with, because this is where a lot of coverage has gotten sloppy. Count 1, cyberstalking, under Title 18, Section 226(1)A of the U.S. Code. Count 2, making materially false statements to federal investigators under Section 1001. He's not charged with her death. He's never been charged with causing her death. The indictment alleges that from November 16th, 2022 through April 27th, 2024, John Paul Miller engaged in a course of conduct intended to harass and intimidate his wife and to place her in reasonable fear. According to the Department of Justice, the alleged conduct includes sending unwanted and harassing communications, posting a nude photograph on her online without her consent, using or threatening to use nude photographs and videos to intimidate her, causing tracking devices to be placed on her vehicle, subjecting her to surveillance, damaging her vehicle's tires, interfering with her finances and her daily activities, and on one occasion, contacting her more than 50 times in a single day. The false statements count is the one I find most telling, because prosecutors allege that in October of 2024, Miller lied to federal investigators on 3 specific points: that she contacted him more than he contacted her, when phone records allegedly show that he called her at least 50 times, that police had never told him to stop contacting her, when Horry County police allegedly told him explicitly to stop, and that he did not damage her tires when prosecutors say he purchased a tire deflation device online and sent messages to other people about her vehicle. And here's one more allegation that kind of reframes everything. Prosecutors say Miller told investigators that he had hired a private investigator in order to prevent Mica from purchasing firearms. Prosecutors allege that he actually hired that investigator to surveil her over suspected adultery. Now, again, he's presumed innocent in all of this. He pleaded not guilty at his arraignment on January 12th of this year. But more than 70 people packed into that courthouse. Protesters stood outside. And he was released on a $100,000 unsecured bond with an ankle monitor, a firearms prohibition, a passport surrender, and a no contact order covering Mica's family and witnesses. He would waive his right to a speedy trial. Now, Regina Ward, Mica's divorce attorney who now represents her family, said something about the false statements charge that I thought was really interesting. She pointed out that in a false statements case, the victim is the people of the United States. She said that as a community, we're all the victim of that because it means that we don't get answers when we all really want them. So where does everything stand right now? As I'm recording this, of course. I mean, this case has honestly been continued over and over again. A pretrial conference sent for April was pushed after the defense said the discovery was too big. July got pushed, August 25th got pushed, and on August 12th of this year, a federal judge signed an order moving the case from the September term to the October 2026 term, finding that the ends of justice were best served by the delay. And there is still no jury selection date. So there's really been nothing yet. But 2 other things you should know are that on August 12, 2026, the same day that order was signed, Reginald Wayne Miller pleaded guilty in Horry County to receiving stolen goods valued at $2,000 or less. He had been arrested in December of 2025 and had requested a jury trial. He entered the plea on the day he was scheduled to stand trial. And in the legislature, the bill they call Mica's Law has been stalled. Senate Bill 702 would have added coercive control to South Carolina's definition of domestic abuse. It got an emotional public hearing in April of 2026, where Mica's sister Abigail testified that her sister sought help over and over, but it never got a formal committee vote. The sponsor has said he intends to reintroduce the bill in January of 2027, and I think that this would create a great precedent for other states to do the same. But South Carolina is also the only state in the country without a law specifically criminalizing strangulation, which is one of the most strong predictors that a relationship is going to turn deadly. So I'm not so sure that this coercive control bill will land in that state. Now, this is a really sad case with a lot of nuance tied into it, and I'm sure we'll learn more as the documentary comes out. But if you're watching this and something felt a little too familiar, I just want you to notice which part. Was it somebody telling you that your friends are the problem instead of them? Was it somebody who needed access to your medical decisions or your money or your location and had a very reasonable sounding explanation every single time? Was it a community where you knew the only options were to comply and leave quietly? Because that last one is the tell. Bernard Kennerson said it about Solid Rock, and I've really never heard it put any better. He said the atmosphere was that if there was a problem, all you can really do is leave and leave quietly. Any group where the only way to raise a concern is to disappear is not a healthy group. Whether it's a church, a company, family, friendship, relationship, whatever it is, it's a red flag, and you can really spot it from a mile away once you know how it takes shape. And as for Micah, she was just 30 years old. She was a beautiful singer. She designed everything the church put on the screen. She kept 11 journals trying to figure out how to leave but still be a good person. She asked her sister to remember everything she said in case something happened. And she deserved a system that could hear her the first time. So I can't wait to hear what you all think about this case. Please go watch the documentary. I believe it drops Tuesday or Wednesday of this week, and then come back and see if your mind has changed between this video and watching the documentary. I, of course, will be watching it. And if you want, maybe I'll do a little live later this week after the documentary drops and just talk about anything new that came out that I didn't cover here. But of course, please share your feelings, your opinions, and just know that this is a safe space for you. I hope this resonated, and I hope that if you're in a dangerous situation, you can find a way to get out. And if it takes you a few times, that's okay. What matters mostly is your safety. And there are people out here who want to support you and help you. I'll leave some resources down in the pinned comment below, some organizations that help specifically women leaving a dangerous situation. So take a look at those resources if you do need them. With all of that being said, please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video soon. Bye.